So this is a great pleasure to be with all of you. I'm really privileged to be a part of this wonderful program, and it's almost sort of a pioneer in terms of a leadership development program for Catholic women, and I want to thank all the organizers who make this possible because it is their vision and, more important, their sense of wanting to serve the Catholic young women of the church, and so we need to give them a big hand. Let's give all of our organizers a big hand. So first of all, before I go into what I'm going to talk about today, I want to show our logo. So first of all, we are about faith, action, results. So we grow in our faith through the word, through sacrament, and through action. And Ceres is specifically started for the action part of it, that for our faith to be authentic, for love to be really meaningful, that love is turned towards someone. And so we were created in World War II to serve people overseas. Catholic Charities was created to serve people in the US and is about 25 years older than CRS. But CRS mission is therefore to go out and serve all on the basis of need and not on the basis of creed. And so we are the action part of how faith is manifest. Today we are in about 103 countries, in the most difficult of countries, war-torn and very poor. We serve 107 million people. And the reason that I received that award or acknowledgement is not because of me. I was just at CRS for only a year and a half. But it's about the work of the Catholic Church working in your name. Sometimes we go overseas, people don't even know, they can't say the word Catholic Relief Services, but they're saying these are the Catholics from the United States. All right? So we work in your name in these countries. So that particular acknowledgement of being one of the 500 most powerful forces is really for the work of the U.S. Catholic Church over 70 years, not only to serve those who are in very difficult situations. So think about expanding the staff during the height of Ebola, for example, and going out there and take on the most difficult jobs, and working with the Syrian refugee situation, and so on. It's really for showing up when the need is there, for staying so that there could be sustainable solutions and not just a Band-Aid, and also for raising our voices. When we see that things in the field in different countries are really not working, we actually do a lot of congressional testimony. We are often in various representatives' offices saying things are not the way you think they are. So it's really that award should go to all of you. It's really for the work of the Catholic Church. But I also want to illustrate a little bit, and that is this particular logo. What do you think it stands for? What does it look like? It looks like a seed. Did somebody say water? A drop of water? Anybody else? A pregnant woman, you know, the womb. Anybody else?
Holy Spirit.
Holy Spirit, and, you know, like the flame of a candle. But actually, whoever said is the Holy Spirit, people seldom get that. The way that it comes about is that there was an animation of the dove, representing the Holy Spirit, flapping the wings, and then it froze right like this, all right? And so that's the head of the dove, and this is the wings as it folds. And so actually that for us represents the Holy Spirit in our work. In addition to all of our areas of work, whether it's water, whether it's seed, whether it is life, whether it is light. So I just want to just give you this sense of CRS. And later on, I'll show a couple of videos of our work. So what I'm going to spend this morning on, and I know that somebody is supposed to be flashing me the time, sister there, all right. So I'm going to start with just my own personal story. I don't think I ever intended to be the CEO of anything. I never intended to be a leader. I don't think I woke up and wanted to serve God either. So my journey started, I was born and raised in Hong Kong. My parents were immigrants from China, sort of refugees. They first left during World War II when the Japanese was actively bombing China. They went to Hong Kong. They didn't meet at that point yet, But then they did meet at a certain point during World War II. Hong Kong was being bombed. They went back to China. They had to flee from cities to cities as the bombs came closer. After World War II, they went back to Hong Kong, where my maternal parents, grandparents are. And then they decided to go back to China. You know, the war is over, but then the communist revolution came, and they decided that it is not safe to stay. They went back to Hong Kong, and this time for good. And as you know, most Chinese families own land, which is kind of like the rest of the people in the world. And when you leave behind your ancestral land, that's it. Everybody starts all over again. So I grew up in Hong Kong in a time when it was a refugee culture. Everybody was sort of, the parents, all of our parents were started all over again. My parents had 6 children. I was the 5th of 6. And there were 6 children because my parents wanted 2 sons. As Chinese, sons are very important. And they needed an heir and a spare. The first son came as the second child. Unfortunately, the second son didn't come until after me. So anyway, so there are 4 daughters in the system. And my one brother is a doctor, one brother is a lawyer, as my father wanted. And the 4 daughters, my 3 older sisters, 2 did not finish high school, and nobody went to college. And it was sort of the days of sort of girls' opportunities are not even a topic. My mother never went to school. She had a tutor who came to her when she was young who taught her how to read and write. My grandmother never went to school. In fact, she had her feet bound. And it was a generation. I have actually 8 grandmothers because it was a time in China when men had multiple wives. Hong Kong, not until the 70s, still allowed for polygamy because that was the culture. That was the culture I grew up in. I was baptized a Catholic at birth because when my father was young, he went to school in Hong Kong. He went to a Catholic school. He himself was baptized. And so he made sure that all his children were baptized, but he never went to church. So he saw 2 responsibilities. One was to make sure that all the children were baptized, and second was that all the children were enrolled in Catholic schools, which were better schools anyway. And third, he insisted that we all went to Mass, which is she would drive us, we would go to Mass, and then he would pick us up. So I've never been in church with my father except at a wedding and at his funeral. So that was sort of my Catholic introduction. So, but I was enrolled in a Catholic school, in one of the most wonderful Catholic schools, and that's the Maryknoll Sisters. And they were missionary sisters from actually the US and mostly from the East Coast, although it then broadened. The Maryknoll Sisters themselves were also evicted by the communists. So they were evicted, and they started these schools for these young women, girls, young girls, you know, 1st grade. So from grade 1 to grade 12, I was with the Maryknoll Sisters, and that was the most wonderful experience. Our class is quite small. It's only 120 students. And today, I'm probably in touch with 50 of those 120 girls whom we have known each other since we were 6 years old. And we are as thick as thieves. All right? And there's absolutely no posturing, no elbowing, no trying to impress each other. We are just friends, and wonderful friends. Along the way, we got an extraordinary education. We started learning English in 2nd grade because the nuns could not speak enough Chinese. So it was either they or us, so we were the ones to learn English. So it was like immersion of these 2nd graders whose first language is English. But we learned to become very good in English. And along the way, you know, education opens you up to different worlds, different ideas. You could imagine different things for yourself. And so, you know, imagining Florence Nightingale or St. Elizabeth Seton or whatever it was. So it actually allows yourself to sort of think about sort of yourself in a very different way within a Chinese culture. and of course we were always curious about the nuns. What was it really under that wimple that they have? Do they go swimming in those outfits? Do they ever wear pajamas, for example? So all of the really pertinent details, about the nun's life. But of course, as we grew older, there was a greater understanding, a question, an appreciation of why did these nuns why did they leave home to come and teach us? They don't even know us. And some of the earlier nuns, when they first went to China, they had typhoid, yellow fever, they were imprisoned, some of them. Why would they go through all that hardship just to come teach us? Like, does it make sense? There was a sense that, faith and God are very real to these sisters, because otherwise it wouldn't explain anything. The only thing that explained this sort of choices was that God was very real to them. So along the way, we were teenagers, we were not deeply spiritual people, and really only about 2% of people in Hong Kong are Catholics, and in my school, no more than 10%. So my classmates were mostly not Catholics, some are Christian, but we also developed a habit, nobody asked us to, but we would start going to chapel. So during lunchtime, we would spend 10 minutes in chapel. It was just part of our routine. And there was such a sense of peace in chapel. Just a sense that, and we were all full of worries. Because in these immigrant cultures, in these refugee cultures, there's a lot of things to worry about. Economic insecurity, and what are we going to do with ourselves, parents' illnesses, and very difficult public exams. So we would probably had our worries beneath sort of all the giggling and so on. But there was this habit of just stopping at chapel. That was that. And I think the beginning of a sense of, God is real, that we don't have to just go through all of these worries by ourselves, but, at the level of like a 17-year-old can comprehend. So eventually we were done, and we love the Maryknoll sisters. They're very much still a part of our lives, and the incredible impact they have on us. Not only a fine education, not only a sense of God, but also a sense of the others. So, we were Legion of Marys, we were young Christians, students, and we had our social projects, and inevitably we would go into the resettlement areas. We would go to the boat people. There were lots of boat people. And they opened us up to a world where life really was so terrible. And one of my jobs, they had mobile clinics, which is a big sort of van, and they fitted all sorts of things, and they would take the girls along. I was about 15 years old, and we had a lot of boat people. And boat people live in a boat. They don't have bathrooms, they don't have toilets. But Saturday they would come, and some of them would have cuts. And so the sisters would do, of course, examination, and some of them need medication, some of them need shots, and so on. The girls' job, our job, we would be in our uniforms, and it's that if people have cuts, first thing is you have to clean the wound, right? Just to see where the wound is. It's usually encrusted with dirt and some dry blood and so on. I hated that job. I never went into medical school. But the most humbling of that job is when people have cuts on their feet. And you have to sit on a low stool. They're sitting on a higher chair, and you take their feet and you start cleaning. It's very tactile and it's very smelly. All right? I don't know whether you've ever handled other people's feet. And it was one of the most humbling jobs I've ever done. And so whenever, we are on Holy Thursday and people wash their feet, I always sort of remember sort of the whole tactile feeling of that job. And I didn't find any glamour in serving the poor. I just know that that is something which God calls us to do, but actually is a pretty difficult job. But on the other hand, then, it gives me a sense of a different way of life, of people who have so little. It opens up the questions of, why do these people have so little? What will happen to them? Do their children get to go to school? will they die? If all of a sudden, for example, they have some type of problem and sometimes there's a blocked intestine. You know, they don't have ambulances, don't even have phones. So what do these people do? Just really basic questions. And I think that's what the sisters' education do. Then I decided that I needed to go to college. And I didn't want to go to college in Hong Kong because, first of all, those public exams are killers, you know, the O levels, A levels. I was a very good student, but I think somewhere I realized that that education system, there was no joy in it. It was just memorization after memorization. And because I was educated by Americans, I wanted a different way of really learning. And American university sounds so exciting. But the real reason too is I knew I needed to help my family. My father had a gambling habit. Before the gambling habit, he had enough of a drinking habit so that he lost part of his liver. And so there was this gambling habit. We would be sort of have no financial security. He had a very good job, but he was always on the verge of, and several times he's lost his job. So, and there's no social security system in Hong Kong at that time. And my father would always say, we are Chinese, we don't have social security, we just have our children. Our children will take care of us. And of course, there's always a sense of the two sons will take care of them. But somehow, even my younger brother was not a very diligent student. But somewhere, even then, by the time I was 12 or 13, I had this incredible sense of responsibility and worry. When I was 13, my father had his first heart attack. And in those days, you know, this is like in the 60s, and there was not a lot of advanced medical care. I remember I would come home from the hospital, I would be so filled with worry, and I knew that you know, and I thought, like my brother, yeah, you know, that probably wouldn't work very well. And so I had this sense, and the only way in those days that girls could help take care of the family was to marry well. If you marry into a rich family, you could help take care of your family. And I thought I was a chubby girl with a big mouth. So I said, you know, didn't look like trophy anything, and besides would not pass the test of a mother-in-law who plays a very important role in selecting the daughter-in-law. So I had this sense, yeah, I had to take care of my family, and the way I would do it is through education and education in the United States. So I didn't know anything about US universities, and so there was a professor who was taking a sabbatical from Purdue University, and he was at TWA, and my older sister was a secretary there, and I would help her on Saturdays, and did stapling and collating, you know, when humans actually did that work. And he said, oh, Carolyn, I was 16 years old. You should go to Purdue University. You can study anything you want. All right, so, and you need to practice for the SAT and so on. I just want to let you know, my first practice SAT, I didn't do a good job. I went to the US Information Systems. I remember going home, and we had a nanny. I have a nanny who is the most wonderful woman, full of attitude. My nanny's name is Gaga. And she kind of took care of us. I said, Gaga, I did really poorly, you know, on my practice test. I could do math, but those English words, I have never heard of them before. And she said, well, every night, just spend an extra hour and study the dictionary. All right? So she never went to school. She was sold as a servant when she was 9 years old. So I did. Every hour, each night, I spent an hour each night studying the dictionary to take the SATs. In any case, to make a story short, I did get into Purdue University, but I had no money to go. And I was able to, and my father was completely against the idea. So he didn't want a girl to go over to the US. He had just gone over to San Francisco, and he saw Haight-Ashbury's with all the hippies who didn't wear clothes. So he said, no, my daughter's not going there. And besides, he didn't have the money to send me the education. The funds were earmarked for the boys, not for a girl. So anyway, I raised the money myself, from my older brother and sisters. My brother would pay for my dorm fees. My different sisters pulled together their funds, and my nanny had forced my father to give us a weekly allowance since we were born. So that weekly allowance has really grown, and it was enough to also pay part of the tuition. In all, I had exactly 1 year of expenses to go to Purdue University. So I went to Purdue University. I knew I had only 1 year. My first day was not a very good day. I was supposed to sign up for classes, and somehow I, who have never read a map before, because if you live in a city, you don't need to read a map. You just need to know the bus routes. Bus number 23 takes you to that tall building, which is gray. That's when you get off the bus. So I never read a map in Hong Kong. So I read the map, going to sign up for classes, and ended up in the Purdue band's office. So I started crying. They told me this is not the place. And I started crying because I thought I'm going to fail. If you couldn't even sign up for classes, you can't go very far. The receptionist then called the Catholic Center at Purdue University, and she asked me, she said, do you have a religion? I said, Roman Catholic. So she called over to St. Thomas, which became my home forever and ever, and said, we have a young freshman here who is very homesick. Can we have her to come over and see you? So that was the first thing. And then later on that day, they did send me to one of the most kindly professor who became my counselor. And I told him I wanted to sign up for as many credit hours as possible because I only had 1 year of tuition. The bottom line is St. Thomas took me in and just, became my family in so many ways. The basement became my study space. A lot of times I hung out in the kitchen where the staffs are. All the cakes and cookies that were brought to the priest, I get to sample them. And I developed the habit of going to daily mass. And that's where I met my husband. And at the end of every night, before I go back to the dorm, St. Thomas is right in the middle of the campus. In fact, one of the sisters know. And before I go back to the dorm, I would go sit at St. Thomas in this dark church, lit by candles, very minimalist type of church. I would sit there and I feel like this is my home. This is my home, and I sit there and I would tell God what I learned for that day, what was difficult, who had a mean word and who had very kind words, and what am I supposed to do for this and that, because I started making decisions without, I couldn't ask for help from my mother or my father or whatever it was. That year, I signed up for 42 credit hours. And just because if you know that this is your only opportunity, you'll be amazed how eager you are to cram your schedule. So, quite a lot of the skin from my knees are still left in those pews, I think. But it was not a sense like I'm now going to pray. It was like, okay, let me work out the day here in this chapel with God. And I just talk. And even today, nowadays, my favorite prayer habit is that, and I've had it for a long time now, is I like to clutch a cup of coffee. I feel the warmth, I feel the aroma. I go into chapel, and I feel like I'm at the kitchen table of God. Kitchen tables is actually where life happens in a family. People are coming and going, sometimes in a rush, sometimes not finishing a sentence. We say, what do you have to do today? Is there anything hard? Will you be coming home for dinner? And then at night you come back and say, did that work out well? How did that go? And tomorrow, what are you going to do? And actually life happens in that kitchen table. So that was the kitchen table. I feel like when I'm in chapel, that's the kitchen table of God's home, and I'm in that home. Actually, one time asked my spiritual director, is that irreverent? Is that irreverent? And he said, no. He said there was a saint, and I forgot which saint it was, who liked to darn socks in her kitchen. I mean, this is in the Middle Ages. Darn socks in her kitchen when she is praying. So those were the habits that I developed at St. Thomas. People were so kind to me. They became my family to go to all the events and so on. I still have the pictures of the two priests, Father Leo and Father Leo, actually, on the mantle where we have pictures of our parents. The other staff members who were there, we still keep in touch now. I see them after 40-some years of this friendship. They took me home on vacations, and I think Father Leo took me home so that he could play golf and I could visit with his mother. But, when I defended my dissertation, so at the end of 1 year, I ran out of tuition, and I had applied for a full scholarship, which there were only 2 at Purdue University for undergraduate international students. Even today, people don't give scholarships to international students. They're supposed to be the ones to pay full fees. And they're the ones actually whose tuition fees are to cover the rest of it. So international students don't get full scholarships. And so there were only 2, and I applied for it. And so it was April, and the results were released. And I had to make a choice. And that is, Mass is at 11:30, and by the time Mass is done, it's at 12 o'clock. The International Students Office would be closed. So I would have to wait till 1 o'clock if I go to 11:30 Mass. Or so should I miss Mass at 11:30 and just go? There's also 4:30 Mass. So I actually decided that I would go to 11:30 Mass, and I would wait from 12 to 1, and then go to the office. And the real reason I decided to go to 11:30 Mass was I was convinced it was going to be bad news. There is no hurry to get bad news as soon as possible. And so why hurry to get bad news? And moreover, I really need to have a talk with God, And I did. I had this talk about why is this so difficult? Why is it harder for a girl? Why? And just really got it out and say, okay, I've done my best, and you will have to do the best of it. Well, for no reason at all, I got a scholarship, full scholarship. This is a kindness of people I don't even know who somehow decided to give a scholarship to international students. And somehow it came to me, and of course my whole life changed. And I used that money, so it was a 3-year scholarship for the next 3 years, and I decided, knowing very little, that I would pack my undergraduate study, the remaining 3 years, into 2 years. And that way I would have an extra year left to go to graduate school on that tuition, on that scholarship. I didn't know it didn't work that way at all. All right? But never mind, everything worked out. And actually, when I defended my PhD dissertation, the church rang the bells. Yeah. So my sense of the people of God, of what is a community, is formed by very loving people. No particular magnanimous act of anything, but just daily hospitality to a person who needed hospitality. And then the rest is the rest of the story. Eventually, I finished my PhD. I did from freshman year to my PhD in 7 years. And it was the whole idea that if you think that this is a real good opportunity and you don't want to let it go, you'd be amazed at how much you can do. I worked in industry for 2 years, didn't like it. I went back to Purdue. All in all, I was in Purdue from 1972 to 1997, when Notre Dame said, could you come and be our business school dean? And I said, I'm not interested. And my career was going very well at that point. I was in the provost's office, who is the highest academic officer. He was a Jewish man who loved me, and he really wanted me to follow his footsteps, to be an academic officer in these big universities, and I was an associate provost at that point. When Notre Dame called was to be a dean, is not a step up. Purdue was much bigger than Notre Dame and actually had more Catholics than Notre Dame. And our family was very happy at Purdue University, and we were very happy at the Newman Center. We were not missing a faith community. So I was not interested. And then my 2 sons, our 2 sons at that point, said, definitely don't leave. One day I went to daily mass at St. Thomas, and when I came out, it was as clear as day. I went home and told my husband, I said, oh no, I think we're supposed to go to Notre Dame. At mass today, it was just this really clear conviction that we were staying here for the wrong reason, and we should go to Notre Dame. And of course, Notre Dame was a whole mission of what does it mean to be a Catholic business school, right? And what does that mean? What is Catholic about a business school? Then I was going to stay 3 years and go back to Purdue, but I stayed 14 and a half years. Then CRS said, we want you to come, and I thought, I don't even know anything about international development. I carried a map of Africa with me in my first year at work everywhere. I knew so little. I was a board member, but board member is like a grandparent. You come and say, wow, great work, you know. Everybody looks great. Okay, great. End of this visit. We'll come again in 3 months. So you never have to deal with anything. You just hear beautiful stories and go and see a performance. And really, my first visit at the National Security Council, where my predecessor was still there, was talking to one of these deputy National Security Council about food insecurity and that there is enough conflict so that the local government would not allow food to be dropped, and that should we breach that line and drop food because people were being starved to death. And it's in this area called the Blue Nile. And I was sitting there and I said, I didn't remember that the Nile comes in colors. You know, did I pay attention in geography class in 7th grade? The Nile, that's where Moses was dropped, and it's in Egypt. Like, what is the Blue Nile? Where are we talking about? This big disaster in the world. And I knew enough that I couldn't ask, where is the Blue Nile? Like, this person would have no confidence in CRS and this new CEO, you know, because global disasters is our game. So I actually excused myself to go to the restroom. Fortunately, this is actually in the West Wing of the White House. Fortunately, they didn't close off the internet. I was able to go on Safari and typed in Blue Nile before I come back to join the meeting. And guess where the Blue Nile is? It's in Sudan. It's in South Sudan, actually. So nowhere even close of where this was. So I want to close this story now. And going to CRS was a major discernment activity, major discernment. I worked with my spiritual director for 2 or 3 months because one of the things is not only would I go into some work that I don't know anything about, but I know the least compared to the 5,000 colleagues I have. And it's rapid decision making. And it's a complex operation. We are in, even then 100 countries. Our budget was as high as $940 million, almost $1 billion. And we work with 1,200 local partners, 5,000 colleagues, and the global church everywhere. And also, I would be giving up tenure. Tenure is like you could never be fired unless you do something terrible. And for a person whose whole career was really oriented about security, to give up tenure was sort of like, I've never known any other Chinese who gave up tenure. I just want you to know. Not a Chinese immigrant who gave up tenure. So I was like, what is this? And I worked with my spiritual directors, and he directed me to this whole idea, not pros and cons. And in fact, even he said, Carolyn, if it's pros and cons, you could work that out, because I'm a very analytical person. He said, that wavelength is not speaking to you, all right? He said, when you make major life decisions, it's about joys and fears. It will come to you, it will speak to you. And carry a piece of paper around and know some of these things down. I actually have a book called Working for a Better World, and it goes into this. So I just want to say a couple of things. And what have I learned from this journey of this wonderful thing? I have learned, I'm just going to pack it in like 10 very brief lessons. One is that I think any journey that begins with love could never go wrong. I don't think when I was 17, preparing to go to Purdue, I had, notions that I would spend my life to serve God in this service to serve 100 million people. I just wanted to make sure that my family is taken care of. I wanted to make sure my father, my mother, and my nanny will be able to find a way and that I'm part of the solution. That's how it started. And I think that a journey that begins with love will just sort of find its own sort of good places. The second one is that on that journey, it's not easy. I mean, there are a lot of hardships, but I've now come to believe that hardships, if we step into it, those are the ways that we grow. For example, I would never know that I could handle 42 credit hours of work if I didn't have a sense that I only have 1 year at school. And I want to learn as much as possible. I want to make the most of it. I didn't think about work as a burden. I thought of it was this opportunity of a lifetime. And along the way, too, different hardships have caused me to actually grow in unbelievable ways. So I do believe, in the story about the cocoon, that, a butterfly comes out of that cocoon and you could not peel the cocoon off. It doesn't work. The third thing is that I have learned, too, that work a lot of times is really our own ticket to be a part of something, to be at the front row of something. Like, I feel completely edified to be in the work that we are in, CRS work. That privilege is unspeakable, actually. And I thought of work as my way of being a part of that world, which I want to be a part of that world. And in fact, all through my 30-some years of career, I've always looked at work as sort of, this is my entry ticket to sort of what is happening in a big way in the world. But the fourth thing is that I think our life's journey is how God becomes real to us. How God becomes real to us. I think God first became real to me through other people, through the faith of other people like the sisters, through the joy of their work, through the hospitality of the people at St. Thomas, and through the generosity of so many people in my journey. So God became real because goodness and generosity and kindness were real. I was a recipient. It was not a theoretical concept. And also, of course, many of these people are Catholic and Christians, and I saw that a faith-filled life is manifested in the way they treat other people. And I think that's what witness is about. Those people were witness of their faith. And it was such a powerful witness. That witness made me the beneficiary of what they do, how they live. So it's not what they talk to me about, it's how they live and how they treat others. So God for me first became real to other people. It is their witness. And similarly, we're therefore called to be witness to others. The fifth point I want to make is, if I've learned anything, it would be that I worry too much. It's the whole idea that you step back and say, God has always been there. Just because you don't know how something will work out doesn't mean that it wouldn't, all right? And so many times I was at the point where I was at the river that there isn't a boat and there isn't a bridge. Like what do you do? Somehow I'm not stuck at that river. My life goes on, moves on, and I think everybody's lives do. And you sit back and you stand back and you say, God has always been there. And I think that we don't go through life all on our own. It doesn't all depend on us. And because that is the case, this journey never ends of how is God real in your life. The sixth point is that how much we hold back from God depends on how real God is. If God is very real, you could do things, take on new journeys, surrender yourself in different ways. You don't hold back. So this whole journey, and it keeps growing. How real God is will drive how we live, will drive how much we hold back from God. And so I could say in many ways, I've grown in my faith. There are things that I would do now. I think giving up tenure was one of those. It was the most freeing experience now, actually, that I was able to do because I think God is real. There are still things I hold back in my life because God is not real all the time and in everything. And so that's my own faith journey. The seventh point is that I never looked for leadership position. I was too busy. At school, I was just trying to get all the credit hours I could and be done. When St. Thomas nominated me for a very big deal leadership award, because I spent all my time there, and so it was natural when I did my study break, I would help with the social action projects, I would participate in this and that. It just wove into my life. The type of extracurricular I did was all related to the church, and all the projects they did was social action based, and there was some theology courses that I took also, and so on. I never sought to be a leader. When I was asked to go into the provost's office, I hardly knew what I was doing. I never applied for the job. I never applied for the job at Notre Dame. I never applied for the job at CRS. I just never did. I just was very busy doing what I was doing. And I actually think that sometimes the American culture obsession with the word leadership, we were just talking about it at breakfast. Like in the gospel, Jesus didn't really use the word go lead, except to say, don't lead my people astray, don't lead these young people away from God. But Jesus basically said two very important words, come to me and go to others. And when Peter professed his love, he said, feed my people, tend my people. Right? So this whole thing about what does it mean really to lead, I think we need some work on that. The eighth point, our work is really in the most sort of destitute, disastrous places. And I've come to the conclusion, and there's so much conflict, that love is the only answer. Love is truly the only answer. And the action that we take has to be grounded in love, and it has to lead to love. Even love for our enemies. I just wrote a piece that will be published, I think, in March, whatever it is. Love for enemies is not only necessary. I have now seen it happen so often. And we also have peace building, mediation, conflict resolution, projects that we actually count on it being able to happen, that people can come back together, that there could be forgiveness. I just spent some time on Skype with a family who was captured by ISIS for 1 year. Father, daughter, son, and son. And their conclusion is, they actually wrote me a letter, that they never thought of their human captors as the enemy, but they thought of evil as a real issue. Evil that causes you to hate. Evil that rips away the humanity of each person so that you could believe the worst of that person. That is evil, but it's not the individual. So I have seen it so often. I think love is the only answer, and that Jesus is right when he said we have to forgive our enemies. I think it's possible. I think grace also makes it happen. The ninth point I want to say is, a lot of times in our own journey, we think about, well, what can I do? That's actually the wrong question. The right question, there are two ways to do it, is what can we do? Because our journey is not just about I, it's I and God, or God and I. And so if you think about what you can do, what I can do, it's quite limited. If I think about what God can do, and I'm just a little vehicle in there, it's actually quite exciting. I've now gone a lot of places, not because what I think I can do, but I thought, it's kind of fun to be an instrument of God. So let's see where he would send you. When I was at Notre Dame, I would stop at the grotto every morning, and my prayer would be, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and Blessed Mother, this is a work day. We all have to show up for work. And in a lot of the very difficult meetings, I would just leave a chair open and say, this is the Holy Spirit. We're going to work on this together. And then some of the mornings I thought, Holy Spirit, I love it to you, but you led me down a rabbit hole. Or I was more emotional than I would like to be, or, oh, Holy Spirit, that was really a good thing to do. But this is the sense, if we think about what can I do, well, it's really quite limited. But if you really believe that we are instruments of God to do the work He wants us to do, the whole question is, what can God do? And are you willing to be sort of part of that journey? Because it could be quite interesting. I think that's the answer. That's the right question to ask. What can we do, remembering that God is part of it? I have a 10th point, but I'm going to not share the 10th point because after you hear this, I think everyone should walk away with your own 10th point. Right? So your 10th point is really just, to think about, what did you get out of this? So my allowable time is over. I have 7 seconds, 6 seconds left, now 5. But what I'm going to do is to borrow 5 minutes, and I'm going to show you a video. And this is a video about CRS work, actually, and it's in 3 parts. It's only total 5 minutes. It's about our emergency work in Haiti. It's about our education work in Burkina Faso and our agriculture work in Madagascar. And what I want you to notice is not just seeing the pictures and so on, but also the joy which is in these people's faces. That a lot of times I think about people in difficulties. We just think about their suffering and so on. We don't think about, in some ways, how embedded joy is part of that. And that joy comes when we know that God is with us. And sometimes that message is reinforced when people show up. You will also see some of the students who are going to Capitol Hill to do some of the advocacy for us. So this is Higher Gifts, and I'm going to use 5 minutes of your break for this video called Higher Gift, and it'd be good to bring some of the lights down too. Thank you. Do we have a sound?
Set your sights on the higher gifts, on the things that comes from your Maker in heaven. These 3 gifts are all that remain, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest is love. If I speak with the tongues of the living and of angels, but speak without love, I am only brass without song, an empty noise on the wind. Set your sights on the higher gifts, on the things that comes from your Maker in heaven. These 3 gifts are all that remain, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest is love.
And if I understand every mystery, having wisdom, but think without love, had I faith to scatter the hills, I am nothing at all.
Set your sights